Hi, I'm Dave Cox, and CEO of Worlds, and your host of the Worlds of Possibility podcast. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Ross Bates, CTO and co-founder of Worlds. And our guests today are Helen and Dave Edwards, the founders of Sonder Studio and hosts of the Artificiality podcast, where they're helping people and organizations make sense of artificial intelligence. I've known Helen and Dave for several years now, and one thing I can tell you about them is that they're always a year or two ahead of what's important at trending in markets. And in this edition of the World's Possibility podcast, our umbrella topic was change management as it relates to AI. So how companies can prepare for the tsunami that's coming. But inside of that conversation, we really covered some fascinating topics, like the cultural side of AI, like how can we prepare people and teams to work effectively with AI, or co-evolving with technology. Like for the first time in human history, we're having to consider how we're going to co-evolve with AI, and the evolution of trust with AI. So the important difference being trusting people and trusting technology is very different, and how we can evolve our trust of AI. And finally, the normalization of complexity. So how we can navigate the challenges that are posed by an increasingly interconnected world. So we spoke for 2.5 hours, and obviously could have gone for another two. We cut it into 4 episodes I think you'll find equally fascinating. So throw the chair in the fire and sit back and enjoy this conversation with Helen and Dave Edwards.
So welcome, Dave and Helen. Ross, thanks for being here today. I feel especially lucky here today. I feel like I'm surrounded by greatness for this conversation because we've had pre-conversations, talked a little bit last night, and we've been talking for over the years about some very important topics just to say a little bit about you two. I mean, known you for a few years now, and a fascinating thing about you is you're always at least 2 or 3 years ahead of what everyone else is talking about. I think we had this conversation about AI and its effect on organizations. Was it 3 years ago?
Probably.
Yeah, 3 years ago. And it's really starting to happen now. But I thought before we get started on all that, I'd love to hear just from you guys, just for our audience, just how did you get into this? How did this become your obsession?
It's a good question. We started working in AI probably about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it originally started with a project that Helen was doing, working with a startup thinking about how to use AI in the utility industry. And then that got us chattering about this and thinking about it, and the kids were sort of hearing and absorbing it. And as the oldest of the kids started to think about going to college, we started getting this question of, well, what should we study? Or should we study anything? Like, aren't the robots going to do it all, right? And this was sort of 2015 timeframe. Yeah. And that's when we decided that, well, this seems like the next big thing. We both have sort of a history of dealing with next big things, and we figured this was time to actually really get into it. And so at that point, we started our first AI research business called Intelligentsia, mm-hmm. which you were a part of. And we interviewed you then and featured Brain Space, which was great fun. And that just progressed from there. So we started with Intelligentsia, then we sold that on to Atlantic Media, worked for Quartz on their AI business for a couple of years. And then we started working again in the AI space just independently a few years ago, which has been great. And it's gone from a world of, wow, that's this really big thing that nobody really understands, to, oh, wow, we all have to now deal with this, just in the last 6 months. So things have changed quite a lot over the last decade.
Can you talk a little bit about your work, the work you're doing today with companies and around change management?
Sure. We tend to work with companies on sort of everything from the beginning of the life cycle through to the sort of the embedding of the mm-hmm. technology, if you will. Starts with helping people make sense of it through sort of, you could think of it as inspirational talks, visioning, helping them think about what does AI really mean for them and their business, their people, the future of the work inside their organizations. And then we work across the organization to help everybody get a level of confidence and understanding what this new intelligence is actually about, mm-hmm. and thinking about how do you apply it in your work. And for us, it spans the executive level who has to think very strategically. And just in the last, year, this has become a huge, if not the big strategic question for every company, educational institution, government agency. Everybody's thinking, well, what do we do with this? Mm-hmm. But a lot of the value comes with the people who are on the front line, the people who are dealing with the technology, day to day, the people who are dealing with customers day to day. They see where the opportunities are. So we love getting and working with the people in that level, and we communicate with them everything from doing talks and workshops to all of the work that we do, writing and podcasting as part of Artificiality. So it's sort of it's a mix of ways of getting the ideas across.
I'll give you some validation. In our work we typically work with like a large industrial companies, largest companies in the world. And it's one of the biggest topics, just the future of AI, the future of work and how that relates to AI.
Sure.
But so that's going to be our topic today. We're going to talk about that, and you're a perfect guest to have that. And I'm thrilled to have Ross here. He's going to bring something to this that I think it adds to the conversation in amazing ways. So let's talk about that. So before we kind of get into the overall topic, we've had kind of an amazing thing happen the last 12 months with AI. So I wanted to kind of start with you, Ross. So AI has been around a long time, but it seems like was it November of last year when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and here we are a year later, multiple updates later, and we're starting to see that this is different this time. Like this AI is not something that's just for developers. It's just something that everyone can interact with. But can you talk about, just from technically, why is it different this time? What did they do? What happened with transformers that's changed the game with AI?
Yeah, it's a great question I think about all the time, because like you say, it happened quickly, but like you said, also it's this problem. And, I'd love to kind of get y'all's feedback on this too, because these are thoughts that are always developing in my head that while it feels fast, it also has been something that's been going on for a long time. People have been trying to figure out how to make intelligent machines for a long time, whether we call that AI or like those types of things that we've been trying to structure, right? It wasn't like a new idea, but like, well, what happened? Like what's happened in the interim years between the things. And a lot of the things outside of even just model architectures and ways like transformers that teach it how to sort of pay attention to specific types of data and the context and all that, you get really deep into it, but you say, well, why are they doing that? Like what actually led to this specific window, from the 50s or the 60s when we were trying to solve this exact problem? And you say, well, I could try to structure the machine top down, right? I'm going to but we're talking about teaching the machine, right? Like, and so, well, what did I need to do that? Like, and I know the quote, I don't want to butcher this, but it's like to bake a cake, you got to create the universe. Like we didn't have the content, like the internet didn't exist. Well, okay, the internet didn't exist. Like we didn't have digitized information. We didn't have the content to teach the machines, right? Like the internet didn't exist. Well, the internet existed in infant forms, and it was really only the explosion of actual digitized trainable content. You say, okay, well, that's good. Like these large language models required that. It couldn't achieve what it does today without that. A human could not have done that, right? Well, okay, well, what else changed that was different? We talk about GPUs in particular. You'd say, oh, we've got GPUs, right? Well, what specifically does that unlock that allows these models to do what they're doing? And it's to take the technology out of it and think about like, well, what do they do that we don't do? Why couldn't I teach a machine the internet? And it's parallelization, right? I can take things at scale and do them simultaneously, right? That's what GPUs are very good at. Nerds might call it matrix multiplication or down into what it's actually doing in the weeds, but it's taking the internet and then, and teaching a machine, that's basically the corpus of the OpenAI models at this point. And so the last thing I'll say on it, because I'd love to hear what y'all think too, that there's the architecture itself of transformers and what they're doing, but there's the data it's trained on, right? And if we're looking at what OpenAI is, and when we get into deeper conversations of what actually it's telling us back to us, like we trained it on things that we created, that we humans created.
And it even goes beyond that now, because these transformers, we gave it an initial data set, like you said, the 46 terabytes of information. But after that, we made it accessible to the world. And now everyone's speaking to ChatGPT, and it's learning from that interaction. It's getting experience. And this is where think it gets really interesting, because having spoken to you a couple of years ago, this question would have had a very different answer 2 years ago. But now that this technology is unleashed and everybody has access to it, how does that change from a social perspective, how this technology is going to affect the future of work inside of organizations? This is a big question, but I'll let you kind of take it where you want to take it.
Well, I think if you go back to what you were saying before about change management, and Dave hinted at, I think, a really important component of this, which is that ultimately it's about how humans use this technology. Because although we've trained these models on all the digitized data from the past, note it's the past, right? And we're generating the big changes is generative AI. So it's generating new data, but it's generating new data off patterns from the past. So you need humans to do this refresh, and we can talk about the different ways of conceptualizing what refreshing this data actually means, so that we don't just become sort of stale repetitions and renditions of the past. And at the very core of corporate change management, people need to have that aha moment where they go, oh, actually we need people, the creative agents of humans who are creatively solving new problems and dealing with unpredictable situations and dynamic systems, to be the ones who are actually refreshing and interacting with these machines.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Dave touched on it, that it's actually the people at the front line who are constantly sort of underrepresented in the AI choices and decisions that companies make about how to deploy AI. And one of, I think, the beauties of the last year is that it's really put generative AI, which is a human thing, it feels human to interact with these things. It's not just a big advanced machine learning model that's kind of doing something abstract that we don't really understand in the supply chain. These are natural language, image generating, multimodal. We even imagine them maybe to be a little bit like not conscious, but we sort of feel like they might be. So in the last year, these things have dropped in a way that we've never seen before in the history of technology. And everyone from the very top of the organization to the very bottom of the organization has similar access to a similar kind of tool. And so if you're an executive or a board member that is thinking about how to, quote unquote, adopt AI, you can pick up one of these tools and actually kind of try it and figure out what it feels like in a way that is much more sort of analogous to the way that someone on the front line might. And we need leaders to really kind of get their head around the fact that it really does change the way that people on the front line actually work, and that these small design elements can have huge impacts on whether people trust, accept, are prepared to provide feedback, are going to game what it means to be part of this sort of worker machine. We call them machine employees, that community. We're so early in this journey that now's the time to have fantastic, deep conversations that are across functions, across disciplines. Whatever industry we step into, people struggle with exactly the same issue, which is the closer you get to the front line, the less people are optimistic. Mm-hmm. The further you get away, the more leadership oriented, the more people are optimistic. And none of this gets solved with that level of difference. And we see it almost the most profound is actually in higher education. In higher education, the instructors, faculty, profs, they're like, there's a spread, there's a distribution, but on the whole, less jazzed about this than senior administrators.
We see that. So I just wanted to give some real validation to that. So when we talk to companies, the C-level and director level people are really excited about AI and automation. They're even forming teams. So we have an AI and automation team, and sounds great. But when the rubber hits the road, when people are actually working with AI and interacting with AI every day, there is kind of a fear there. So I think one of the things we wanted to talk about today is kind of like this evolution of trust. Like before we can really engage with AI, fully engage with AI, we have to learn how to trust it. You're talking with a lot of people, a lot of companies right now. Do they trust AI?
It varies. I think the more they understand about AI, the less they trust it. But it's a nuance, right? So if you go back to the very, very start of AI and think about it from like Turing, there's this built-in bias that happened there, which was about replacing humans. And we need to find ways to have conversations that shift the narrative from, well, humans, they're annoying. They sleep, they complain, you can't really trust them, they sometimes they smell, and humans are kind of annoying and unreliable.
Exactly. Look right at me thinking, yeah.
Whereas machines, they get things right. Yeah. They work all day. They don't take sick leave, whatever those things are. And that I think with generative AI particularly, this is now the moment to sort of reconceptualize trust around AI, because it it isn't as clear as just an automation versus augmentation debate. That is the language of traditional automation. The language of generative AI is much more about personal productivity, creativity, the ability to create new knowledge, the ability to combine things in different ways that have never been there before, and the value of new data to put back into the system, and the value, how the system works as a whole, that it's highly nonlinear, that there are feedback loops between machines and humans that didn't used to exist.
Right.
That when we teach how to use generative AI, and we teach it in very much a use case focused way. It's not, here's a prompt, now go prompt.
Right.
It's if you want to make a better decision, let's talk about how to use one of these models to help you make a better decision. And we take people through this journey where, without exception, there's this moment where people are sitting there and they go, oh, now I get it. That's not the right answer. I've got to keep asking.
That's right. It's
I've
a
got
conversation.
I've got to go to a different place in the model. I've got to craft a question that takes that gives the model a different path through the training data. And what happens is people develop an intuition for whether the machine is right or wrong. They develop skills and how to craft good questions and how to make the next question even better. And the real gold standard is they learn to not just explore the data space, not just use the combinatorial creativity of the generative AI, but they start to see how they can actually access quite transformative creativity steps. So being able to change rules around,
Are we evolving intuition, like with our interaction with machines now? Is that evolving? Is that?
I think we're deepening our intuition for different ways of thinking. So, for example, one of the things that's really hard for people to do is break out of a linear cause and effect process. Here's a cause, here's an effect, there's the next cause. So we think about the world in cause and effect terms as being sort of dominoes falling, right? Just this long line of cause and effect. That's not actually how the world works. It's our simple view of the world.
Yeah.
How the world really works is much more complex causality, multiple different causes, the impact of time, the impact of different feedback. AI helps us get a better intuition for those things. Sometimes it's through awesome simulation, great simulation models like a flight simulator, that sort of conceptual view of it. Sometimes it's just through a better interaction with the machine that takes you, a conversation that takes you into a different kind of space. You see this a lot in education, where one of the great ways that you can legitimately use, say, a large language model, say ChatGPT or Claude, to advance your own understanding is take something that you want to understand but you don't, and get the AI to explain it to you in a way that the context makes sense to you. So, you can adjust a comprehension level. You can say, explain quantum mechanics to me like I'm a high school senior. Right. Oh, don't understand that. How about a middle school? Oh, don't understand that. How about an elementary school, grade schooler? So you can adjust the comprehension level. You can also adjust sort of the angle of attack of it. So you say, okay, explain cognitive bias to me as though I'm a psych undergrad, but I want to study neuroscience. So these slightly adjacent ways of explaining things allows people to fundamentally shift their intuitions because they're just moving context around. And that's how our intuition changes, is we take a concept from one area and sort of apply a metaphor into a different context, and that concept just comes along. All of the things come along for the ride. That's much more how we develop our intuitions, that constant sort of updating from experience in the world.
Helen, one of the things that you were talking about just struck me because you were talking about it kind of in the context of language and kind of what we can process when we're trying to figure out cause and effect, right? That's what we're always trying to do as part of trial and error is what led to this. And we don't see the big picture because even though we're constantly looking at our phones and TVs and we think we're multi-threaded and can multitask, we can't. We can only focus on one thing at a time. We can context switch fast, but we just can't simultaneously process all the things that go on that led to whatever outcome it is that we were trying to either, yay, it worked or it didn't work. So what do we do, right? How do we use AI to make humans multi-threaded? And we ran into that. And this kind of leads into some of my questions I have to you, because I know you guys think a lot about simulation and modeling, and what does that mean? Because some of the things that we run into with simulation is, well, how do I simulate things how do I create a simulation if I don't actually know, right? You can't create the variables that you don't know are going to happen anyway. So how do I go about processing the real-time data of what's actually going on, all those things simultaneously? Because in the vision space, we saw the same thing. I'm going to teach a machine to kind of understand what it sees in the context of it. Okay, now I'm going to add another set of eyes and another one. I've got 5 cameras, 10 cameras. And as a human, you sit there and you try to multi-thread and look at all of it and it just falls apart. And it's not until you can actually use something like a simulation or modeling tool to take all that data and then sort of give it this global view that you go, oh, okay, I understand now, right? But you have to rely on the machine to do that. You have to rely on the simulations and the model and the AI to make to make you multi-threaded. And so I don't know if you guys, have any.
I think that helps with trust. We see it a lot in our clients that the moment they start to trust the AI is when they start to see that it gives them superpowers. Like they can do things with it that are impossible without it. And so an example is like the powers of observation, right? So if we have AI connected to cameras and the person can be everywhere at once and see everything at once and know when to pay attention. Like we have this concept of compressing time. Like an AI can see everything at the same time. Like we read a book one page at a time, and AI can read the whole book simultaneously, right? But it gives, when people start to see that they have these powers of observation that they didn't have before, and the AI tells them where they need to pay attention, they don't have to see everything. They just need to know when and where to pay attention. When they start to experience those things, that trust starts to kind of set in. They start to see, oh, maybe AI is kind of like a co-pilot. It leads to talk. I'm glad you took it here because I wanted to go here like this. So I'm not saying we have trust yet, but this idea that AI is a different technology, that we're actually co-evolving with it. Like it's not a tool anymore. It's something we're co-evolving with. Are you seeing anything like that? Or do people get that? Or is
Yeah, we tend to use an analogy for that goes back quite a while. So we talk about AI now as being a mind for our minds. And that analogy has a metaphor, has an origin with Steve Jobs 40 years ago. He talked about a computer being the greatest tool ever invented, and it was a bicycle for our mind. And that was all derived from an article in Scientific American in the late 70s that had compared the efficiency of movement of all species on the planet. And we humans are pretty marginal. We're pretty middle of the road in terms of efficiency of movement. But then when you put us on a bicycle, our efficiency is like he used to talk about it as like we're like a condor, And so he thought about the computer as being a bicycle for our mind, right? So it gives us that huge efficiency power. And he was pretty much right. For 40 years, that actually worked. It's different now, though, because AI, and especially generative AI, is not like a bicycle. It isn't something you steer in the same way. It isn't something where you speed up, put on the brakes, you control it, that it does exactly what you want it to do. Like in the past, for 40 years, we've made software that if it didn't work exactly as you told it to, you send it back to engineering because you said there's a bug. Go fix it, right? Go fix that thing. Now we've created tools that by intent and by design, they do things that are unpredictable, that we can't specify exactly what that outcome is. So we think about extending that metaphor by saying it's a metaphorical mind, right? Not trying to dive down the theory of mind, pathway at the moment, but it is a metaphorical mind. But we also think it's important because it has to be for our minds. And that's really important when you're dealing with creating a technology that has agency And we are now very much seeing that just in the last couple of weeks, right? As OpenAI has expanded the portfolio of things that you can do through their API, that now you can create GPTs that can take action, that can connect to your Zapier account, that can connect to all kinds of other things. We're just seeing that moment really happen, which is kind of fun and scary at the same time, but fun because we've been talking about this moment for a while. But now you have these things that can take action. So the question is, are they taking the action for us? Or is this sort of a repeat of, the past 10, 15 years of, the social mobile era, where the technology progressed from being the tools that you would tell it what to do and it would do it, to now we've moved into the sort of attention economy, which was basically just trying to come up with ways to keep our attention, right? So that we would actually do things, and it was trying to, manipulate us to keep watching the next YouTube feed or whatever. And we're working for it in order to pay our attention and pay with our attention to make money for the social world. What happens now as we move into this next phase? Are we working for it, or is it working for us?
What's the answer?
Don't know yet. I mean, I think it's a really it's an open-ended question. At the moment, right now, today, in this moment, it's working for us because we're paying for it, right? So at the moment, the way you can use ChatGPT for free. If you want the advanced features, you have to pay. And so it's a subscription. That may or may not be a long-term viable business model for all of generative AI. If we actually want it to be extensible to everyone, having a $20 fee is not viable, right, per month for the entire population to have that sort of pervasive access. What happens as an alternative, right? So what we have now is we built an entire world starting with the information economy and the attention economy. It was all based on our eyeballs getting, creating compensation through advertising for the platforms that were creating them. What happens as these generative AI tools, if they want to be supported by ads? We think we're shifting from an attention economy into the intimacy economy because these tools have such an intimate knowledge of who we are, what we care about, what our reactions are to every little thing. You ask ChatGPT for something and it's not perfect, and you go back and say, well, that's not exactly what I want. What I really want is something more like this. Right there, it has an insight into who you are and what you think and what you need and want and desire that you may not have shared with anyone else. Try using some of the real emotional AIs like Pi, and pretty quickly you realize how much you tell Pi things that you may not even tell, your friends or your partner.
Are you sure about that?
No, I'm pretty sure I've told you everything, but we can check on that one later. It's right there, baby. When it gets that intimate knowledge of us, that's both incredibly powerful. That a tool can actually really understand you, and so next time you're asking for something, it really understands what you want. But it's also potentially quite perilous because there will be no tool that has more intimate knowledge about us and more ability to manipulate what we want than these kinds of conversational agents.
Yeah, what you just said connected to something Helen said earlier about, like, at some point, like, the model, it only leads up to what it knows until now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't know what's coming next. It doesn't know what you actually want until, like you said, until you actually engage with it and tell it what you want. And now people talk about predictive models that will try to then steer your attention or your tasks, but as long as we talk about the future of work and, like, what are we really trying to do here? Like, how do we want this to actually work for us? How do we want to be better off? How do we use the machines to help us? Like, it is part of that engagement is actually, like, it actually doesn't activate until you express intent. What am I trying to accomplish?